So as we continue our series on the Books of Doom, issue number 3 is, well, it's pretty monumental. It's pretty awesome. And the reason why is it shows us that there's a much bigger world out there that Victor Von Doom was simply just not aware of. And the reason why we know that is after his time in America, after he had scarred his face or believed to have scarred his face, he basically left the United States. Now, something that I want to point out here is this era in human history takes place around the time of the Cold War, maybe shortly after the end of World War II. So we're talking about late 1940s, early 1950s, but we're not quite into the 1960s yet. And so this point was where the United States and Russia were basically engaging in a weapons race, more or less. Now, in the real world here, there was a space race and we had conflicts like Afghanistan and Korea and Vietnam. In Marvel Comics, you had those too, but it was also extended to superheroes. In light of Captain America, because Dr. Abraham Erskine had died, the United States, under the direction of Sublime, which is an entity that I have a video on, they had basically begun the process of trying to recreate the super soldier program. The problem is the formula of Dr. Abraham Erskine could not be duplicated, but because of the success of Captain America, Russia had tried to do the same thing. Now, this is where the story of Colossus comes into play. Of course, as we know, Colossus has the ability to immerse himself in organic metal skin. Colossus was sought after by the Russians for their own super soldier program, their own superhero type program. The issue here is that Dr. Doom was pursued as well. Now, this was likely because of the fact Dr. Doom was part of the American program, and so even if the Russians don't know that he has powers, they know he was working with the American military-industrial complex, and so he likely has knowledge that would prove to be very valuable to them. Now, while Dr. Doom has escaped to Eastern Europe and has tried to lose himself in Eastern European cities, he's still plagued with nightmares of Mephisto, who's taunting him about how his mother's soul is being held captive, all those kinds of things. And the issue here is that Victor Von Doom's kind of stuck in a weird situation. He can't sleep because he drives him insane with these nightmares, but he can't really stay awake too often because his body needs rest. And so he's kind of going down this path of mental instability. And this is what he says. He says these sleepless nights, this tireless work is kind of beginning to have a mental toll on him. Now, the other half of this is a guy named Otto. Now, Otto only appears in this part of the story, but he's extremely important because he will be the catalyst that sets Victor Von Doom on the path of actually becoming Dr. Doom with the metal uniform and engaging in the kind of alchemy that we're used to seeing him engage in. But Otto, as he's presented here by Ed Brubaker, is initially just a drunk guy. He just hangs out around the home of Victor Von Doom in various taverns and so on and so forth, and Doom really considers him more of a nuisance than anything else. But I'd like you to keep him in the back of your head because he will be important as we get towards the end of this. But what Doom tells us is that most of his mornings, again, were spent just kind of roaming around the city, basically just sort of killing time. In truth, he doesn't really have a direction in his life. He's not really going anywhere. He's just kind of living one day to the next and just occupying a space in the world. His nights, again, are filled with tireless work, but even the work that he does isn't going anywhere. He's literally building and breaking down and rebuilding the same piece of equipment over and over again, trying to make it perfect, which he knows is something that he'll never be able to do, not because he's not intelligent enough, but because the object has reached its full build. It'll never be anything better than what it already is. But what he also says is that he's being watched. Because the Russians were looking to take the Americans over in terms of military intelligence, in terms of superpowers, so on and so forth, Victor Von Doom was initially being pursued. Now again, Doom isn't really invoking magic here because the kind of magic that we're used to seeing Doom use right now with sorcery and so on and so forth, that comes later. The kind of magic he used when he was chasing off the forces of the Baron were a combination of technology as well as the books that belonged to his mother, but he currently doesn't have those books with him. And so he usually just kind of uses hand-to-hand combat to fend off these guys, and this is what happens. Of course, they tell him that the Russian government would be interested in having Doom work for them, and it's really not a request so much as it is an instruction. But Doom's able to fight them off using a couple of devices that he created that are explosive and scared the wits out of these KGB operatives. And so what he tells them is that if they come looking for him again, they'll get a lot more than they bargained for. It'll likely result in their own deaths. And so to Doom's eyes, he wasn't really being pursued by them. At least he didn't see them anymore. And this is kind of saying something because Doom's very keen, again, in terms of his intelligence, in terms of his awareness of his surroundings. He usually always knows what's going on. And so if he can't see them, it means either they're simply not watching him or they're being extremely sneaky. And so what happens is we pick up on a random day in the town square and he comes back into contact with Valyria. Now, again, for those of you guys who are just joining us, Valyria was the childhood love interest of Victor Von Doom, and she made him feel like his life could have been better than what it was. And she represented a better life for him. She represented hope in a lot of different ways, a hope that he felt he had lost following the death of both of his parents. And so while the two of them begin to sort of rekindle their experience together, Doom is sort of torn here. On one half, he knows his life isn't going anywhere, and so he wants to immediately dismiss her. But on the other half, he needs her. Like, he needs her there. You know, he needs her to sort of make him feel a little more complete. Now, what she also does is fill in the gaps. She says that, of course, the caravan had continued on, you know, even after Doom had left, that one of the guys, Boris, had sort of stepped in as leader in his place. But because of the fact that the Russians were pursuing Victor Von Doom after he had left America, that the Baron, under the direction of the Russians, had basically begun a series of sweeping campaigns through these Romani territories and eventually found the caravan and had basically set fire to it, killed a multitude of its people for the purpose of trying to find Victor Von Doom, interrogating who he could when he could. And so what happens is she eventually came across a guy named Christos, and Christos was a fortune teller who made the case that Victor Von Doom is a guy that simply doesn't want to be found. Now, the aspects of fortune telling that are given to us here are a little shady, and in fact, we'll find out there's a little more going on behind the scenes with Christos than what was originally told to us. But he says that Victor Von Doom's mind is in shambles. He's simply trying to find his way in the world. He doesn't really have a direction, but she ultimately pointed him in the direction of where he was last seen, which was in this town in Eastern Europe. And so, seeking him out, the two eventually fell back into contact again, and this rekindled some romance between the two. And in fact, they actually act this romance out between the two of them. But for Doom, it's more of a feeling of completion as opposed to simply just, you know, fulfilling physical needs. And so what ends up happening is that as the two of them continue about their normal day, eventually Valyria runs into Otto. Now, Victor Von Doom is cruel to Otto in the sense that he's dismissive. He doesn't really want to have any interest in him. He usually chases him off. But for Valyria, Otto is a very sweet guy. You know, he does what he can. He's a drunk, kind of wasting his life away, but he's not a terrible human being. And so this is really Valyria beginning to see the darker side of Doom in terms of his dismissiveness, in the sense that she doesn't really care for how it is that he's passing himself off. But what happens is that as the two of them are engaging in a conversation, as they're talking about how Doom treats Otto, they're suddenly met by the arrival of KGB soldiers. Now, one of these soldiers takes Valyria hostage, and what he says is that Doom has a choice. Either he can watch Valyria die, or he can agree to work for the Russians. And so what we do, or at least what Ed Brubaker does, is he gives us the back story to this. He gives us the back half to this, and he tells us that Christos was not a fortune teller. Instead, Christos simply didn't want to die. He appealed to the Baron and to the Russians and agreed to give them a way to find Victor Von Doom. And so what he did is he went to Valyria and told her where he believed Victor Von Doom was, of course using the information given to him by the Russians due to their previous encounter, and had allowed Valyria to simply travel off to meet Victor Von Doom, after which the Russians and the KGB had followed her, and eventually we end up in this current circumstance right now. Now, this is something I'd like you to keep in the back of your head in terms of how we're seeing Christos here, because in a lot of ways, he looks remorseful and he looks like he's a prisoner of sorts. But what happens here is Victor Von Doom initially wants to keep Valyria safe. The problem is he's not going to be able to protect her and himself against these soldiers who are using machine guns and the soldier, I guess the KGB agent that currently has a gun to her head. But before any of them can do anything, Valyria is immersed in a protective field, and there are a series of explosions on the street. And when everything begins to come clear, we actually find that Otto has been shot and is in the process of dying. But what he says is that he's not just a drunk guy. He's been watching Victor Von Doom. Now, the reason for this is because he hails from a temple in Tibet. Otto was told that a time would come when a man with a hidden face who was trying to hide from the world would make his presence known and eventually become the leader of Otto's order. And so Otto's goal was to monitor Victor Von Doom to see if he was that guy, and then at some point in the future, basically get Victor Von Doom to move to this temple in Tibet. The problem is, because of the fact that Otto's been killed, he passes on this message to Victor Von Doom, but also says that the people in this temple are some of the best teachers in the world when it comes to practicing alchemy and sorcery. And so he says that this is Doom's legacy, this is Doom's path. He cannot deny who it is that he's meant to be. And so he tells Doom, go to the temple in Tibet, go there, learn your destiny, and then become who it is that you're meant to be. And so for Doom, this is basically an ending. This is him walking away from Valyria, it's him leaving his past life behind, and he ends up moving away from this scenario in its entirety and traveling to the temple in Tibet in order to officially become Dr. Doom. But with that being said, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you guys enjoyed it, let me know. Leave a like and hit that sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. And yeah, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.